Running a hotel wasn't just my career, it was my entire world. My name's Philippa, and this hotel was my life. Until one day, he walked through the doors. He stood out instantly, a young man dressed in a suit that screamed money, his attention glued to an expensive phone. But when he smiled, it was the kind that could make anyone stop in their tracks. "Good evening, I'm Algot," he said, his voice as smooth as silk. "I'll be here for a couple of nights. Is there anything interesting going on around here?" I couldn't help but smile back, a bit thrown off by his charm. "Well, Algot, this city's got its fair share of surprises. It just depends on what you're in the mood for," I replied, handing him his room key. Our conversation was short, but something about it stuck with me. Maybe it was his curiosity, or maybe it was how genuinely interested he seemed while I talked. He didn't stay long, but when he checked out, he left a note. It read, "Enjoyed our conversation. How about continuing it over dinner?" I hesitated for a moment. I wasn't used to mixing my professional and personal life, but there was something about him, something that made me want to see where this could go. So we met at a small local restaurant, the kind of cozy place where the chatter and clinking glasses made the rest of the world seem far away. "You've really got this hotel thing down, don't you, Philippa?" Algot said with a grin as we sat down. I laughed, feeling strangely comfortable. "I guess you could say I've had a bit of practice." Dinner passed by in a blur. We talked about everything and nothing, and he was an open book, or at least that's how he seemed. He shared stories about his travels and investments, and when the conversation shifted to me, I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't in a long time. I talked about losing my parents, how it's been just my sister Clara and me since I was 22. "That's a heavy burden to carry, Philippa. You must be incredibly strong," he said. His eyes filled with a mix of admiration and something else I couldn't quite figure out. I shrugged, trying to brush off the compliment. We all deal with what we're given, right? Clara's my main focus. Our parents left us a little something, and I've been careful with it, growing it bit by bit. Algot nodded, looking thoughtful. "That's really impressive. You've got a good head on your shoulders." As the night went on, I realized I hadn't laughed this much in years. But when I tried to learn more about him, especially about his family, he skillfully dodged the topic. "My parents and I don't exactly see things the same way," he said, his expression darkening for just a second. "Let's just say they have their ideas about life, and I've got mine." I didn't push any further. After all, everyone has their own story and their own scars. But as the night came to an end, I found myself wishing it wouldn't. There was something about Algot that made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in a long time. Being with Algot felt like a whirlwind. Each day brought a new adventure, and every moment we spent together was filled with laughter and dreams of the future. He had a way of making the ordinary feel extraordinary, turning simple meals into unforgettable evenings. "Algot, I still can't believe how quickly everything's happening," I said one evening as we sat in our favorite little cafe, the one with the dim lighting and intimate corners. He reached across the table, taking my hand in his. "Philippa, when something feels this right, why wait? I've never been more sure about anything in my life." I looked into his eyes, feeling a swirl of emotions inside me. "I know, it's just, everything's moving so fast. It's a lot to take in." He squeezed my hand gently. "I understand, but trust me, Philippa. I'm in this for the long haul. I want to build a future with you, and I want to start by making our wedding day the most unforgettable day of our lives." The way he talked about our wedding with such excitement and certainty, it was hard not to get swept up in his vision. He painted a picture of a day so perfect, it almost took my breath away. "Imagine it, Philippa. A ceremony no one will forget. A true celebration of our love. It's going to be perfect," he said, his voice full of enthusiasm. "And the honeymoon? You mentioned something about the most luxurious hotel in the world?" I asked, half curious and half anxious. His grin widened. "Yes, it's all part of the plan, but I need you to trust me. Let's do this together. Your savings for the wedding, my funds for the honeymoon, and our future home will make this dream a reality." I hesitated. The logical part of me was screaming to be cautious, but looking into his eyes, so full of love and promise, I couldn't help but nod. Okay, Algot, let's do it. Let's make this wedding a day to remember. As the weeks passed, planning for the wedding took over everything. Algot was a man of action, handling every detail to make sure our day would be nothing short of spectacular. Watching him so full of energy and dedication, I couldn't help but fall even deeper for him. Algot, you're incredible. The way you're managing everything, I don't even know how to thank you, I told him one evening as we looked over the guest list and the extravagant menu he had planned. He pulled me into his arms, holding me close. Philippa, seeing you happy is all the thanks I need. I needed this wedding. To me, it was more than just a ceremony. It was the start of something beautiful, the beginning of our life together. But even with all the excitement, there were quiet moments when doubt would creep in, whispering questions late at night. Was I rushing into things? Was I just getting swept up in the romance? Every time those thoughts surfaced, Algot's reassurances were always there to calm my fears. His promises and comforting words became my anchor, steadying me in the storm of uncertainty. Planning the wedding took up every minute of my days, but despite the whirlwind of cake tastings and floral arrangements, I knew I needed my sister Clara by my side. Ever since we lost our parents, it had been the two of us against the world. Her opinion mattered more to me than anyone else's, especially now. I called her up, hoping she could escape from her job at the cafe for a little while. Hey Clara, any chance you can ditch the aprons and the smell of coffee for a few hours of satin and tulle? I joked, my voice full of hope. Clara's familiar laugh echoed through the phone. For you, sis? I'll trade coffee stains for wedding gowns any day. Give me an hour to wrap up here and I'm all yours. The bridal shop was a dream, racks of white and ivory dresses spilling over like waterfalls of lace and silk. As I tried on gowns, Clara's presence was the calm I needed in the storm of satin and sequins. That one, Philippa, it's like it was made for you, Clara said, her eyes lighting up as I stepped out of the dressing room in a dress that felt like the one. I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. The gown fit perfectly, hugging every curve and flowing to the floor in soft waves of fabric. You think so? I don't know. Do I really look like a bride? I asked, a smile slowly spreading across my face. Clara's grin mirrored mine, but for just a second, I saw a shadow flicker across her face, quick, troubling, and gone before I could ask about it. Before I could even speak, she had already grabbed another dress off the rack. Mind if I try one on just for fun? She said, holding up a gorgeous gown that shimmered as it caught the light. I laughed, surprised by the moment. Are you planning on eloping, Clara? Or is there a mystery man you've been hiding from me? Clara's laughter was usually light and carefree, but today it sounded different, like there was something underneath the surface. Oh, Philippa, you know me. Always a bridesmaid, never a bride. But a girl can dream, right? She said, but her eyes quickly darted away, as if hiding something. The rest of the day was filled with laughter and whispers of silk, but I couldn't help noticing that Clara's mood kept shifting. Her usual bubbly self seemed clouded by moments of distraction. Everything okay, Clara? You seem a little off today, I asked softly, concern creeping into my voice. She brushed it off with a wave of her hand, giving me a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. It's nothing really. Just the usual chaos at the cafe, you know how it is, she replied. But as we left the bridal shop, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. There was an unspoken tension between us, a weight I didn't know how to address. I wanted to believe it was just pre-wedding stress, or maybe a tough day at work, but deep down, my gut told me there was more to it. That night, as I lay in bed, the excitement of finding the perfect wedding dress was overshadowed by my growing worry about Clara. She had always been an open book to me, but now it felt like there were pages she was keeping hidden. And as the wedding day drew closer, the joy I should have been feeling was tinged with a sense of unease I couldn't quite shake. Clara and I had always faced everything together, but now it felt like there was a gap between us, one filled with secrets and unasked questions. Little did I know that the answers to those questions would soon flip my entire world upside down. It started like any other day. I was tidying up the apartment when I noticed Algot had left his phone on the kitchen counter, buzzing with notifications. I didn't think much of it at first, but the constant buzzing nagged at me. It was unlike him to leave it unlocked, but I figured he must have been in a hurry. Without really thinking, I picked it up. And what I saw next shattered my world. The messages between Algot and Clara hit me like a punch to the gut. Every word felt like a betrayal, tearing through my heart. It wasn't just an affair. They were planning to push me out, to discard me like I meant nothing. All those years of sisterhood, all those moments we shared, suddenly felt like a lie. My eyes blurred with tears as I read and reread Clara's message where she confessed that she was pregnant with Algot's child. Can't believe we pulled this off. She's such a fool for falling for every lie. And now with the baby, we can finally be together, just like we planned. The world seemed to spin around me as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. And Algot's response was no better. He declared his love for Clara and his excitement to see me humiliated, kicked out of my own wedding. She's just a naive cash cow. Can't wait to get rid of her and start our real life together. This wedding will be perfect thanks to her money. I sat there, the phone feeling heavy in my hand, my heart shattered. A storm of emotions raged inside me. Anger, hurt, disbelief. But underneath it all, a cold determination began to rise. They thought they could use me, discard me like I was nothing. They had no idea who they were dealing with. When Algot came home, his casual attitude was like salt in the wound. "Hey, babe, did I miss any important calls?" he asked, picking up his phone without a second thought. I forced a smile, my insides boiling with anger. "Nope, just the usual stuff. Busy day," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the storm raging inside. He flashed that same charming smile, the one I now knew was just a mask. "Nothing's more important than coming back to you," he said, leaning in for a kiss. I had to force myself not to recoil. From that moment on, I played the part of the oblivious fiancé perfectly. I smiled, nodded, and continued with the wedding plans. But behind the scenes, I was plotting, planning my revenge on the two people who had betrayed me in the worst possible way. Each passing day became a test of my will, a balancing act between the role I had to play and the fury that burned inside me, but I wouldn't let them see me break. I'd bide my time. When the moment was right, they'd learn the true cost of their treachery. As I lay in bed each night, images of Algot and Clara's deceitful faces etched themselves into my mind. I made a silent vow. They would pay for what they had done, and their twisted game would be their undoing. I was no longer the jilted fiancé. I had become the architect of their downfall. My revenge would be meticulous, calculated, and oh so sweet. The days leading up to the wedding felt surreal. On the surface, everything seemed perfect. Flowers, guest lists, the dress. But underneath the facade was a storm brewing inside me. Algot, as always, was his charming, affectionate self, blissfully unaware of the tempest he was about to walk into. "Philippa, everything's coming together beautifully. This wedding is going to be the talk of the town," he said one evening as we reviewed the final preparations. I smiled, my practiced and polished expression concealing the fire within. "Yes, it's going to be a day to remember," I replied, the words laced with a meaning he couldn't possibly understand. Facing Clara was harder. The sister I had once loved and protected now felt like a stranger. Every word she spoke, every gesture she made, was a reminder of her betrayal. Yet, I kept my mask firmly in place, playing the role of the loving sister, pretending to be blissfully ignorant of the knife she had planted in my back. "Philippa, you're handling everything so well. I don't know how you do it," Clara said one day as we finalized the seating arrangements. I forced a laugh, looking at the woman I once trusted. "Oh, Clara, you know me. Always had a knack for organizing chaos." The irony of my words wasn't lost on me. As the wedding day grew closer, the tension was almost unbearable. Like a tightrope, I walked with precision and care. Algot became more guarded with his phone, his conversations hushed and hurried. But it didn't matter. I had already seen enough. I knew enough. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, a beautiful day for a disaster. As I got ready, the reflection staring back at me in the mirror was that of a serene and poised bride. But beneath the veil and makeup was a woman on a mission, a woman who would no longer be a pawn in someone else's game. "Clara's running late, huh?" Algot remarked casually, adjusting his tie as we prepared to leave for the ceremony. I met his gaze in the mirror, giving nothing away. "Yes, but she'll be here. She wouldn't miss it for the world," I replied, my voice carrying an edge of double meaning. He nodded, oblivious. "Well, she's always been a bit unpredictable, but today is about us, Philippa, our new beginning." I turned to face him, a smile gracing my lips, perfectly composed. "Yes, Algot. A new beginning indeed," I said, my heart steeling itself for what was to come. As I walked down the aisle, the eyes of our friends and family upon me, I knew that this was it. The calm before the storm was over, and the reckoning was about to begin. The vows waited, the guests watched, and the stage was set. It was time for the truth to come crashing down, and for the real show to begin. Standing next to Algot in front of the officiant, my heart was a mix of emotions: hope, trepidation, and cold resolve. The words of the vows hung in the air, a promise of forever that was about to be shattered in the most brutal way. The guests, blissfully unaware of the storm about to break, smiled with joy and teary eyes, anticipating a beautiful union. And then the unimaginable happened. Clara, dressed in a bridal gown that eerily mirrored my own, stormed down the aisle, her eyes locked onto mine. But there was no sisterly love in her gaze, only cold determination. "Move aside, Philippa," Clara declared, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. "I'm the one who deserves to be here. Algot loves me, and this child I'm carrying is his." The room erupted in gasps and whispers as confusion spread among the guests like wildfire. Eyes darted between Clara and me, trying to make sense of the scene unraveling before them. But the real shock came from Algot. Instead of showing any remorse or surprise, he let out a hearty laugh, his true colors shining through the mask he had worn for so long. "Well said, Clara. Philippa, you've been a good host," he said with a cruel grin. It was in that moment that everything became crystal clear. This wasn't just about infidelity or betrayal. This was a calculated plan, a con. Algot and Clara had been playing me all along, using me as their pawn, thinking I would never catch on. They thought they had won, but they were wrong. "But this is where your part ends, Philippa. Why don't you join the audience? This is Clara's moment now," Algot sneered, his words dripping with mockery and contempt. The audacity of their betrayal, so public and so cruel, sent shockwaves through the crowd. But as the reality of the situation sank in, my reaction surprised everyone, including myself. I looked at Algot, then at Clara, and smiled. Of course, why not? I wouldn't want to miss the show. After all, I did pay for it, I said, my voice calm, betraying none of the turmoil inside me. Clara and Algot exchanged confused glances, clearly not expecting such a composed response. The guests, too, were baffled, their eyes darting between us, trying to make sense of the surreal scene unfolding before them. "Philippa?" I took a seat among the guests, my head held high. The whispers grew louder. "What is she up to? Is she really going to let this happen?" The questions buzzed around the room like a swarm of bees, but I remained serene, a statue amidst the chaos. Algot and Clara, now standing together at the altar, looked unnerved. My calm demeanor had thrown them off. Their plan to humiliate and discard me was not unfolding as they had anticipated. "What's your game, Philippa? Why are you so calm?" Algot asked, his voice a mix of curiosity and concern. I met his gaze, my smile never wavering. "No game, Algot. Just enjoying the fruits of my labor." "Please proceed. I'm eager to see how this plays out," I replied, my words a velvet-covered dagger. The ceremony resumed, but the atmosphere had shifted. The guests watched with a mix of shock and anticipation, unsure if they were witnessing a wedding or the prelude to a dramatic reckoning. As Clara and Algot exchanged vows, the words felt hollow, a mockery of the sacred promise they were supposed to represent. And as I sat there, surrounded by friends and family struggling to comprehend the spectacle, I knew that this was just the beginning. The real show was yet to come. Clara and Algot, in their arrogance and deceit, had just secured front-row seats to their own downfall. When the officiant asked if anyone objected, the doors burst open. A woman, older and more worn than Clara, stormed in, her eyes blazing with fury. "Stop this wedding right now!" she demanded, her voice slicing through the silence like a knife. Algot's face turned ashen, his eyes wide with shock. "Alva, what are you doing here?" he stammered, the mask of the perfect groom slipping away. Alva, Algot's legal wife, as I had discovered, marched up to the altar, her expression a mix of disgust and determination. "I'm here to stop you from making a bigger fool of yourself and these people. Philippa, you deserve to know the truth," she said, turning to me with a sympathetic look. The guests murmured among themselves, the scandal unfolding before them more gripping than any soap opera. Clara clutched her stomach, her face a mask of shock and fear. Alva continued, her voice firm and clear. "Algot is a liar and a cheat. He's in debt up to his ears, his investments failed, and he's been using all of you to dig himself out of his hole. And Clara, you poor girl, you're just another pawn in his game." The room erupted into chaos, the guests rising from their seats as the whispers grew louder. Algot tried to speak, but his words were drowned out by the uproar. I stood up, my heart pounding, but my voice steady. "There's more," I announced, silencing the room. "I hired a private detective after I discovered Algot and Clara's affair. Not only is Algot already married and drowning in debt, but he's also been neglecting a daughter, a child he's never supported." Clara's face crumpled, the reality of her situation crashing down around her. "Algot, is this true? Tell me she's lying," she pleaded, her voice breaking. Algot, now pale and defeated, had no words. His lies, his deceit, all laid bare for the world to see. But the final blow was yet to come. As the guests processed the revelations, Algot's parents, two stern and imposing figures, entered the room. I had reached out to them, told them everything, and now they were here to confront the son who had brought shame to their name. Algot's father, a man of few words, spoke with a voice that resonated with disappointment and anger. "Algot, you are no son of mine. Your actions today, and in the past, have shown your true character. You are cut off from our family and our fortune." As the room settled into an uneasy silence, I looked at Algot, Clara, and the shattered dreams they had tried to build on a foundation of deceit. The pain of betrayal still throbbed in my heart, but standing there amidst the ruins of what was meant to be my happiest day, I knew that this was not the end of my story. In the aftermath, I found myself in the cold halls of justice, seeking reparation for the damage Algot had caused. The courtroom felt like another world, a place where the pain and humiliation I had endured were translated into legal jargon and paperwork. "Algot, you've not only broken a promise, but you've also shattered trust and exploited generosity. You owe me more than just an apology. You owe me compensation for turning my life upside down," I stated firmly, my voice echoing in the quiet courtroom. The judge's gavel sounded like thunder in the tense silence. "The court finds in favor of the plaintiff. The defendant is hereby ordered to pay $100,000 in damages for the distress and financial loss caused," he declared, his words a balm to my wounded spirit. As I walked out of the courtroom, the burden of the past months felt lighter. Justice had been served, but the road to healing was just beginning. Algot's troubles didn't end with me. Alva, his legal wife, fueled by hurt and fury, launched her own legal battle, demanding compensation for his infidelity and neglect of their child. The once suave and confident man was now entangled in a web of his own making, his lies and deceit finally catching up to him. Clara, my sister, the person I had trusted and loved more than anyone, found herself alone and abandoned. Algot had fled the city, leaving her to face the consequences of their actions. She was pregnant and scared, a far cry from the carefree and happy girl she once was. "Philippa, I know I don't have the right to ask for your forgiveness, but I'm lost, and I don't know what to do," Clara pleaded one day, her eyes filled with tears. I looked at her, the sister I once would have done anything for. "Clara, you were my family, my blood, but what you did, it's not something I can just forget or forgive. You chose your path, and now you have to walk it, just like I'm walking mine." The distance between us was more than just physical. It was a chasm filled with betrayal and hurt, too wide and too deep to ever bridge again. Life moved on, but the scars of those tumultuous months remained. I focused on rebuilding my life, on finding peace in the simple things. I had loved and lost, trusted and been betrayed. But through it all, I had survived. And as I looked back on everything that had happened, I realized that the most important journey was the one I was taking within myself, a journey of healing, of rediscovering my strength, and of learning to trust and love again. Story 2. The air was clear in the morning. As I crouched amid the flowers, I could smell the smell of moist dirt. The dew still shimmered on their petals. I knew who it was without even looking up when I heard the distinctive crunch of high-end shoes on the gravel path. I saw scarlet bottoms, stilettos still playing in the mud, and my father's cherished garden. Only one person would dare to strut through them. Her voice was oozing with fake honey as she purred. I continued to concentrate on the fragile white petals, the identical roses my father had planted for my wedding, which had ended in divorce papers, a scandal, and treachery. And suddenly the woman standing behind me was the precise reason for it all. "Hi there, Vanessa," I said plainly. "You know why I'm here." She stepped forward one again. Overhanging the flower bed was her shadow. I eventually turned, wiping my mud-covered hands against my apron. "Nothing needs to be discussed." A sneer formed on Vanessa's painted red lips. "The reading of the will is tomorrow, and Ethan and I think it's best we resolve things civilly." I took a deep breath and tightened my hold on the pruning shears. "My father lives here. His property." Her tone was patronizing as she corrected. "And we think we're entitled to our fair share because Ethan was essentially Robert's son for 15 years. Suddenly I felt the shears in my hand weigh more. "Do you mean the same Ethan that had an affair with one of his secretaries?" Vanessa gestured with her manicured palm, perhaps erasing the ancient past. "He was pardoned by Robert. They continue to play golf on Sundays," until she abruptly stopped, her eyes bright. I tightened my jaw. The searing pain that still weighed heavily on my chest was pressed up against her words. In just 2 weeks since my father's departure, the vultures had already begun to circle. I strongly said that my father wasn't a moron. Ethan wouldn't have gotten anything from him. Vanessa's phony grin wavered. "We'll investigate that. Daniel, your brother, appears to have a different perspective." I felt cold. Since the burial, when he had spent more time consoling Ethan than his own sister, we had not talked. "Have you been in contact with Daniels?" With a tense voice, I asked. "Oh, sweetheart." Crooning, she moved in closer. "More than chatting. He's been incredibly helpful." I clenched my jaw, recalling what my father had said years before. "Sweetheart, the roses require a strong hand, but never one that is harsh. There is a purpose for even the sharpest thorns." I looked into Vanessa's eyes. My voice was steady and cool. "Before I lose my manners, leave my property." She laughed. "The sound is as fragile as broken glass." "Your land. That's quite cute." She pointed to the expansive property. "Millions of dollars are worth this mansion. Did you really think you'd have it all to yourself, Charlotte? While the others go with nothing, we play home in Daddy's palace." Unfazed, I moved onward. My father built this house brick by brick. All the trees were planted by him. Each room was designed. Money isn't the issue here. This has to do with legacy. Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Legacy, please. It's all about the money. And you will discover that the hard way when that will is read tomorrow." She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder one final time before turning toward the garden gate. "Also, you may want to begin packing. Before we move in, Ethan and I will need to remodel for at least a month." Down the walk, her shoes clicked. I glanced at the blooms below. The white petals, once immaculate, were now stained by dirt, evidence of the way my trembling hands had crushed them. White flowers, according to my father, are a sign of fresh starts. However, all I saw was crimson. I took my phone out of the pocket of my apron and called the one person who would be sympathetic. Leah? It's me, I'll guess. Vanessa visited you, according to my closest buddy. Yes, my fingers clenched around the phone as I let out a breath. She's just as awful as we anticipated. Would you be able to visit? I need to talk to you about anything about the will. Leah's tone was resolute and forceful. In 20 minutes, I'll be there. Do not be concerned, Charlotte. They don't realize how intelligent your father was. I hung up. I noticed something. There was a little envelope hidden under the rose bushes. It's in a corner. Wet. My breath caught as I reached for it and withdrew. It was addressed to me, and I immediately recognized the handwriting as being that of my father. In my palms, I flipped it over. My heart is racing. For what duration had it been concealed there, anticipating my arrival? Okay, Father, I murmured, staring down at the envelope. You seem to have given me one final surprise. As I stood there, clutching what felt like the first piece of a puzzle my father had left behind, the sound of Vanessa's car faded into the distance. Ethan and Vanessa were going to find out that they had picked the incorrect opponent for whatever game they were playing. Leah showed up on schedule. One hand holds a bottle of wine, the other a law briefcase. We might need this, I thought. As she entered my father's study, she spoke. I let out a breath. You don't know. The unopened mail was still in my shaking hands as I perched on the edge of my father's leather chair. The familiar fragrance of pipe smoke and old books remained in the air, a soothing presence in the middle of the mayhem. This was his haven, his place. Additionally, it would be completely destroyed and remade to fit the ostentatious vision of Vanessa and Ethan if they had their way. You still haven't opened it. Leah put her suitcase down and pondered deeply, her voice serene yet eager. I gave her a quick glance before turning back to the envelope. I flipped it in my hands. I confessed that I wanted to wait for you. Leah didn't think twice. Once Vanessa mentioned that Daniel would assist them, she grabbed the bottle of wine, poured 2 full glasses, and gave one to me. Your father was very particular about what he revealed and when. I looked up because of it. What are you saying? All she did was point at the envelope. Crack it open. Charlotte. Taking a big breath, with trembling fingers, I cracked the seal. There was a little key and 1 page of paper inside. I took a deep breath and started reading. Someone who understands human nature as well as I do has already taken action on this state, Charlotte. If you are reading this, it's probably Vanessa. She did always make me think of a shark. No soul, just teeth. My desk's bottom drawer may be opened with the provided key. Everything you need to safeguard is inside, which is yours. Do you remember the chess lesson I gave you? To keep the queen safe, you may occasionally have to give up a pawn. Dad. Love. I felt a knot in my chest from emotion. Leah was on her way to the desk already. You were aware of this? I made more of a statement than a query. I assisted him in setting it up, she said. 6 months ago, immediately following his diagnosis, your father came to me. He was fully aware of the outcome. The drawer opened with a gentle click once I slid the key inside. There was a USB drive and a large manila envelope inside. Leah stopped me before I could grab them. You need to know something about tomorrow's will before you look at those. Reading. I scowled. What? 3 days before to his death, your father added a codicil. A what? A change to the will, she clarified. And it will transform everything, I promise you. I scattered the contents of the envelope on the desk after taking them out. As the pictures poured out, I gasped. Dozens of them. In a parking lot that is dark, Vanessa meets someone. Ethan walks inside the office of a lawyer. The printouts of Leah's emails and bank statements weren't there. There was more to my father's suspicion of foul play. He kept a record of it. He had them investigated. I muttered. Leah grinned. Better. They followed him. The USB drive. It shows Vanessa trying to buy off his nurse to get information about his will. I picked up one of the pictures 2 days before he passed away. A horrible feeling formed in my gut, causing my fingers to clench around the edges. Is Daniel there? My voice faltered. Leah gave a nod. 3 weeks before to your father's death, you met with Vanessa. I turned to the next picture. My heart is racing. Daniel was heading out of the meeting. A look of loathing distorted his features. He had what seemed to be a check in his hand. As proof, he held on to the check. Leah clarified, took it directly to your dad. Robert realized then that he needed to move quickly. Vanessa, however, claimed that Daniel was assisting them. With my head whirling, I said, he was engaging in risky behavior. Leah told me, offering them just enough information to make them overconfident while surreptitiously helping your father gather proof. I reclined on the chair and attempt to take it all in. My dad told me, but why? For Vanessa had to raise her hand first. Leah pulled. A briefcase containing some papers. Vanessa and Ethan will believe they have won when I read the will tomorrow. I straightened my posture. What? Leah extended her hand. They will receive a large share of the estate from the first reading. I sprang up so quickly that my wine glass overturned, leaving a scarlet mark on the carpet. Do you mean me? Let me be done. Unconcerned by my outburst, Leah said. The cortisol starts to work at that point. I set a trap in motion. She gave a nod. The instant they receive the inheritance, they activate a provision that exposes their attempted deception. All of the images, videos, and bribes are made public. I examined the evidence that was splayed across the desk. A wave of realization washed over me. To get them to incriminate themselves, he gave them the impression that they had won. That's right. Leah grinned triumphantly. Everything is left up to you by the genuine will. With a trust established for Ethan, Daniel, and Vanessa, all they receive is a well-publicized demise, my father's final lecture. My throat constricted as I traced his handwriting on the paper with my fingertips. He continued to protect me even after he passed away, teaching me, helping me fight back. Leah's tone grew softer. Another thing. Daniel wants to meet you tonight. Before tomorrow, you must know what more he has for you. I let out a breath and gazed at the lowering sun outside the window, considering my brother, regarding Vanessa's arrogant expression in the backyard, about all my father had done with care. Invite him to visit, I said. Arriving after nightfall, Isaiah didn't resemble the calm, self-assured brother who had stood next to Ethan at the burial. Exhaustion clung to him like a second skin. His suit was rumpled, and his tie was loose. He held a leather portfolio like a shield as he paused at the study doorway. You look awful, I spoke, ending the quiet. Yes, playing double agent isn't as enjoyable as the films portray it to be. He tried to grin, but his eyes never met it. May I enter? I pointed to the chair on the other side. The proof of our previous finding was still strewn all over Dad's desk, even though Leah had departed an hour earlier. Emails, bank statements, and photos. A proof-filled USB drive. Isaiah's gaze rested on the mess. You have located Dad's insurance policy, I see. I crossed my arms. What were you doing? And why didn't you tell me? The inquiry sounded more pointed than I had meant. He let out a big sigh as he slumped into the chair. Since I had to put things right. I was a fool after everything with Ethan and the way I handled you throughout the divorce. Charlotte, my brother is you. I made the correction. You were meant to be with me. I am aware. He took out a check from the portfolio and passed it across the desk in my direction. Vanessa asked me to testify to this. When that dad made his last, $500,000 decision to betray my own sister, he wasn't thinking well. I gazed at him and then at the check. You didn't cash it, though. He gave a head shake. No, I went straight to my father. His voice broke. Charlotte, you ought to have seen his face. He was disappointed, not enraged. He then explained his strategy to me. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 9 times, each note piercing through the dense hush. There's more. Isaiah took out his phone and went on. I took notes on everything, every meeting, every offer, every threat. Vanessa. Even before her father became ill, she had been organizing this for months. He hit the play button. Vanessa's voice filled the room. Your testimony regarding the old man's mental state will be used to challenge the will after he kicks. In addition to that, he and Ethan have a lengthy history together. We'll get everything. Charlotte won't even see it coming. I balled my hands into fists. When was this recorded? 2 months ago. Isaiah's face grew serious. But wait, things worsen. He fast-forwarded the audio, the voice of Ethan. Right now, the house will be sold. Sell off the assets. Charlotte can go back to her modest flat and her dismal gardening company. In any case, she never deserved any of this. Turn it off, I murmured. Isaiah did, then took out a final document. That's the reason I came tonight. Charlotte, Vanessa wanted more than money. She desired retribution. I scowled. Retaliation. For what purpose? For causing remorse in Ethan. With bitterness, he said, for requesting alimony from him. Because when you caught them together, he hesitated and looked horrible. The recollection struck me hard, entering my own bedroom, observing them there. Vanessa's arrogant, victorious grin as my marriage fell apart all around me. For 3 years she served as his secretary, Isaiah went on. Everything was planned by her. Worked her way into Dad's social circle and into his life. This document demonstrates that she began stealing from her father's business 6 months prior to your discovery of them. I grabbed the paper out of his hands and quickly scanned the account numbers and bank transactions. Dad was aware of this. My voice was barely above a whisper. Isaiah gave a nod. He discovered that he was constructing a case against her just before to receiving his diagnosis. But the cancer. He let out a breath. At that point, he began organizing this instead. The codicil. I whispered, yes. Isaiah wiped his face with his palm. Tomorrow's going to be tough. They think they've won. To capture their historic moment when they take over the estate, Vanessa even hired a camera crew. In spite of everything, I laughed hollowly. She hired cameras. I gave a headshake. She's going to chronicle her own collapse. The irony would have pleased Dad, Isaiah said, a small, real smile breaking through. I met his gaze. I appreciate you coming here for this, even though I know that one night of disclosures won't be enough to undo the previous 3 years. He gave a nod. I've got your back no matter what happens tomorrow. The moonlight silvered Dad's garden as I turned to face the window. Do you recall when our father saw us fighting over that toy automobile when we were kids? Isaiah gave a little smile, the crimson Corvette. He forced us to clean the house's windows. We must learn to see things clearly, I remarked. With comprehension in his eyes, Isaiah nodded. And now you do. I looked back at him. What Dad was attempting to educate us makes sense to me. Even in the end, as Isaiah occasionally stated, winning isn't the greatest triumph. It's in letting your adversaries defeat themselves. The grandfather clock chimed 9:15. Tomorrow was rapidly approaching. You need to sleep, Isaiah stated as he gathered the papers. The show tomorrow is going to be incredible. I stretched out and touched the window pane as I watched him go. The glass felt substantial and cold to the touch. These windows had always appealed to Dad. He referred to them as his family's eyes of the house. They would see justice carried out precisely as he had intended tomorrow. And as the sun rose the next morning, brilliant and beautiful, I knew Vanessa and Ethan had no idea what was coming for them. As the camera team rearranged their gear, I sat in my father's study once more and watched Leah organize documents on the enormous wood desk. Anticipation was thick in the air, laden with the weight of all that was going to happen. Isaiah slid through the door, his countenance inscrutable. Outside, Vanessa is rehearsing her polite acceptance speech. Something like enjoyment made his lips move. In case she becomes overly emotional, she even prepares a second take. Is everything prepared? I asked Leah. She gave her briefcase a gentle touch. Everything is ready. This envelope contains the sealed codicil. Copies of all the evidence are also sent, the instant they accept the original terms. A bustle in the corridor cut her short. The voice of Vanessa echoed through the door. Hello, and thrilled. We'll install the new chandelier here. The old one is so dated. As she adjusted her suit jacket, Leah whispered to herself, everyone places. Now let's get the show started. Wearing a sleek black dress that likely cost more than most people's mortgages, Vanessa arrived first. Ethan trailed behind, seeming somewhat uneasy in his fitted outfit. Following them, the camera team checked angles and adjusted lighting. Charlotte? Ethan gave a cold greeting. It was the first frank conversation he had had with me since the divorce. Let's get started, Leah declared, assuming her position as Robert's lawyer behind my father's desk. I will now read his last will and testament, as well as any other papers he may have completed prior to his death. Vanessa was so excited that she almost vibrated. We're prepared. The first reading, when my father's estate, including the home and company shares, was to be split, just as Leah had forewarned me. 60% to me, 40% to Ethan and Vanessa. Vanessa gripped Ethan's arm and shrieked. I was aware. We were too important to Robert to exclude. Leah's voice pierced through her celebration like a dagger, but 3 days prior to Robert's passing, a cortisol was added to the will. Vanessa froze her smile. A what? Ethan whispered, now appearing anxious. A modification. What sort of change? Leah broke the envelope's seal quietly. Any inheritance under this will cannot be accepted unless specific financial irregularities found in the months before Robert's death have been thoroughly investigated. There was silence in the room. It seems like even the camera crew held their breath. What are the anomalies? Vanessa's voice had lost its triumphal edge. Perhaps these will explain. The pictures were slipped over the desk by Leah, or this USB disk with video of a bribery attempt, or these bank records, which demonstrate Harrison Industries' systematic thievery. Ethan swiped one of the images. The color was fading from his face. Where did you purchase these? From his corner, Isaiah raised his voice. Dad had a lot of evidence, including recordings of you two conspiring to use false testimony about his mental state to challenge the will. Vanessa leaped to her feet so quickly that her chair fell back. Switch off those cameras. Oh no, I responded, getting up to look at her. The cameras remain in place. You wanted to capture this moment in history. You can't do this, remember? She questioned, turning to Ethan. Inform them that this is not possible. Ethan wasn't paying attention, though. He was still marveling at the images, particularly the one showing him entering a competitor's office with secret corporate papers. Leah went on, unfazed by the confusion before her. The codicil is quite clear. All of this material is immediately released to the appropriate authorities upon any effort to claim an inheritance. The option is yours. Option. Vanessa's laughter was choked. What choice? We're trapped by you. No, I made the correction. You have yourselves trapped. Every plan. All lies. Every effort to take something that wasn't yours. All of it culminated at this moment. She became enraged with Isaiah. You were meant to help us. He gave a shrug. I was helpful, not you, though. Vanessa's desperation spiraled as she spun back to Ethan. Do something. But Ethan was already standing, straightening his tie with shaking hands. It's finished, Vanessa. We've lost. It's the devil. I'm not going to let that. Is my daughter. Dad's voice permeated the room. Everyone froze. Leah had hit play on a video file. The monitors used by the camera crew came to life. And there he was. My dad, slim but resolute. Recorded a few days before to his passing. Additionally, it indicates that you have exposed your genuine self if you are seeing this. As I anticipated you would, greed is a bad instructor, but realize his repercussions are wonderful pupils. Vanessa staggered backward, mascara streaming in black lines down her face. Leah answered casually, Actually, this isn't over. Yes, it is. To discuss the embezzlement evidence, the police are waiting in the foyer. I would advise working together. It might be useful for sentencing. As cops entered the study, they led Ethan and Vanessa away. The camera continues to roll, and I sensed him right then. My dad. In the air of the home he had constructed, in the yard, just beyond the windows, in a solid wood desk everywhere, he had arranged it all, not just to preserve his legacy, but also to impart one last lesson in patience, fairness, and long-term planning. Isaiah breathed out slowly. Given that the media circus that ensued was just what Vanessa had desired, I suppose the cameras did capture their momentous day, not in the manner she had intended. By evening, the street was lined with news vans. Reporter calls were constantly buzzing on my phone. You need to see this. I'm turning up the volume on Dad's old television, Isaiah said, Every channel was showing Vanessa's arrest. Her designer dress contrasted sharply with her tear-stained, streaked face. The Harrison Industries probe has found several cases of fraud as cops escorted her into a squad car. The reporter rambled on. "Turn it off," I whispered, scratching my head. "I can't watch anymore." Leah came in the door, waving her phone like a medal. "It gets better," she smiled. "The DA just called. They discovered phony businesses, offshore accounts, and more." I let out a breath. Waves of relief swept over me. It was finished. Dad had won, and so had I. The weight of what had just transpired still remained in the air. Isaiah let out a breath and reclined in his chair. Haley wasn't only pilfering from her father's business. He claimed that she was in charge of a whole network of fraudulent schemes. I twisted and held my stomach as I swallowed. I wasn't sure why. The fate of my ex-husband still mattered to me. Isaiah scoffed, singing like a canary. When he faces severe jail term, it becomes out that he is not as faithful. Before I could react, a harsh tap at the study door made us all jump. A police investigator walked inside, his look stern, but remorseful. "Miss Harrison," he added, "we need to address some further evidence we've unearthed." I beckoned for him to sit. "Morse." He nodded and placed a folder on the desk. In Miss West's apartment, we discovered documents. She had previously tried something similar. There are at least 3 prior incidents of her targeting rich families. However, she never succeeded on this magnitude before. Leah leaned forward. Other families, indeed. After integrating herself through work or social connections, she would manipulate events to obtain their resources. The folder was slid across the desk by him. Does that sound familiar? I scanned the documents after opening the folder. My chest constricted the secretary posture. I muttered, "It wasn't random." No, it wasn't. According to the detective, she singled out your ex-husband because of his affiliation with your father's business. After 3 years of self-doubt, blame, and what-ifs about my failed marriage, the fact that the affair was simply her way suddenly became crystal clear. There's more. The detective took out another paper and went on. "We found this in her personal files. It's a detailed plan, what she intended to do after securing control of the estate." My blood ran cold as I read the document he handed me. The money wasn't the only factor. It outlined accidents, ways I could meet an unfortunate end after the transfer of assets. Isaiah was to be framed for financial misdeeds, even sketches of how she intended to remodel the house. Let's start by ruining Dad's garden. I scarcely heard me pronounce the words. She would have killed me. Isaiah's hand gripped his chair's armrest more tightly. She never would have gotten the chance. The detective's face was grim. With the fraud and attempted bribery accusations already pending, this greatly strengthens the case. She's looking at 15 to 20 years minimum after he left. Before Leah's phone buzzed, the room fell silent. She read the message and sighed. "It's my contact at the DA's office." Holden just ended his remarks. I braced myself, and he acknowledged to everything, including how he helped Haley access secret corporate data before your father's murder. I paused, fearing the response. Was he aware of her intentions toward me? Isaiah looked over the new papers and shook his head. That's why she didn't tell anyone about it. Probably knew he wouldn't have the stomach for it. I had an idea. Dad knew, didn't he? That's why he put all of this in action. Leah gave a slow nod. He had a suspicion. That's why he hired private detectives. Why? He documented everything. Charlotte, he wasn't merely safeguarding his reputation. He was protecting you. I turned to look out the window. The pandemonium had not affected Dad's roses, which were still in bloom. The stillness was broken by Isaiah. Before Haley's attorneys attempt to change the already written story, we ought to make a statement public. Leah opened her laptop and read a brief message asking for privacy during this trying time and stating that she would cooperate with authorities. Expert. Respected. Everything. Haley isn't. Dad would have liked that. A tiny, exhausted grin reached my lips. Forward it. Isaiah took his jacket out. There's one more thing. He pulled out an envelope and set it on the desk. I found this in Dad's personal safe. Once justice is done, it is marked. When I opened it and saw my father's handwriting, my hands shook. The truth has finally surfaced, my beloved Charlotte. If you are reading this, keep your heart from becoming hardened by this experience. Life still needs living, and the garden still requires care. Justice wasn't the only reason I set this trap. I did it so you could be free, without a question. Free to blossom anew, free from fear. Always love, Dad. Reporters from outside kept up their live coverage, informing the world about the betrayals, the arrests, and the scandal. On the inside, though, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, surrounded by the proof of my father's love and wisdom. Calm. Isaiah exhaled. Now what? I glanced back at my brother and best friend after glancing out at the roses. We rebuild together now, I said. A month later, I watched as Haley and Holden were escorted into a courtroom wearing orange jumpsuits, a long cry from their expensive clothes. Everyone gets up, the bailiff yelled. Leah gripped my hand as we stood. She had demanded to be my moral compass as well as my attorney. She muttered, "You don't have to talk today. The evidence speaks for itself." But I had to, I knew. Dad had warned me in his letter not to become upset over this. My heart felt too afraid to be silent. As she went by, Haley's gaze met mine, and for the first time, there was no arrogance, only desperation. Despite the overwhelming evidence against her, her attorney had attempted to negotiate a plea agreement. The DA refused to budge. "Your Honor," the prosecutor began, "the state would seek to bring into evidence Exhibits A through F, establishing a pattern of systematic deception and conspiracy spanning 3 years." I watched as the images, bank statements, and recordings were revealed with each disclosure. Haley's complexion darkened. Slumping in defeat, Holden simply gazed at his hands. Charlotte Harrison is called to the stand by the state. It was like traveling across the ocean to get to the witness box. I sensed that everyone was watching me. The jury is straining forward while reporters are scrawling on their notes. Haley's eyes pierced my back. "For the record, please provide your name." "Harrison, Charlotte. Could you also explain your connection to the defendants?" I looked directly into Haley's eyes. For 15 years, Holden was my spouse. Haley was his secretary, and the lady he had an affair with. I sucked in a calming breath. 6 months after our divorce, they were married. While my father was ill, they began to visit him and developed a bond with him. Disapproval. Haley's lawyer shot up. "Pertinence. Motive is established." "Your Honor," the prosecutor replied. "Overturned." I went on. I explained the threats, the manipulation, and the proof that Dad had gathered. The prosecution, Miss Harrison, displayed the papers that had been discovered in Haley's flat. "When did you learn about his intentions to keep you safe?" After they were arrested, I swallowed hard. My father had a suspicion that something similar might occur. He gathered proof for that reason. Why he modified his will, I spoke firmly. Even after he left, he continued to protect me. That's when Haley snapped. She got up quickly. Her handcuffs were rattling. He was a cunning old guy who couldn't bear to watch his beloved daughter suffer any losses. The entire situation is a setup. "Sit down, Miss West." The judge gave the order. "Do you believe you have won?" She growled at me. "Do you believe this is the end of it? I once ruined your marriage. I'll also figure out a method to ruin everything else." It shook the courtroom. She kept yelling threats, but the bailiffs held her. Holden appeared to want to vanish. The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. "Remove the defendant," as they dragged her away. I attracted Isaiah's interest in the gallery. He gave me a subtle nod. Any pity had just been dashed by her fury. Leah leaned closer. That, in my opinion, simply sealed her doom. I turned to see Haley being escorted away from the courthouse doors. For the first time in years, I wasn't terrified. Justice had been served, and it was now ready to blossom anew. Story 3. It was difficult to grow up as Charlotte Kensington's daughter. Every move I took and every breath I took was meticulously tracked and evaluated. Before I could even walk, my father, Jonathan Kensington, CEO of Kensington Global, had a life plan for me. "Oh, Olivia," as he adjusted his immaculately fitted Armani suit, he would say, "second best is never acceptable to a Kensington. Our Hamptons villa served as a representation of that idea. 30,000 square feet of carefully planned grandeur, with money and power radiating from every space. However, it felt less like a home to me, and more like a gilded cage. I had perfected my father's design by the time I was 25. Preston Lockwood, the third heir to Lockwood Enterprises, and my father's hand-picked future son-in-law, is engaged to Stanford Business School graduate and senior executive at Kensington Global. There was only one minor issue. I had fallen deeply and irrevocably in love with someone else. When my Rolls-Royce Phantom broke down on a wet Monday morning, I met Ryan Carter. En route to work. He was the mechanic who saved my life. He showed up in a broken-up tow truck, wearing a t-shirt smeared with grease, and his grin made my heart skip a beat. Wiping his hands on his faded pants, he remarked, "Looks like your timing belt shot. It will take a few hours, but I can solve it." I decided to wait at his tiny garage rather than phoning my driver because of his sincere brown eyes and the way he spoke to me rather than at me. My life was irrevocably altered by that choice. Ryan wasn't your average technician, I discovered over cups of awful coffee from the vending machine. He had earned offers from Fortune 500 organizations, finished first in his class, and worked his way through MIT. However, he rejected them all. He said to me, his eyes sparkling, "Life is too short to spend it doing something just because it looks good on paper." Those words struck me like a lightning strike. For the first time in my life, someone had articulated precisely how I felt. Coffee led to supper, then to moments of escape from my oppressive reality whenever I could. Ryan never made an effort to impress me with Michelin-starred meals or lavish presents, nor did he inquire about the affluence of my family. Rather, he taught me the value of simplicity. Drives along the seaside at midnight, undiscovered parks and picnics, warmth and laughter-filled nights. I led a double life for 6 months, being myself at night and a social princess by day. However, I was aware that it couldn't go on forever. Our state's charity event was the tipping moment. My mother was showing me around like a trophy while Preston was rambling on about this multi-billion-dollar deal. After the wedding, Olivia told a group of socialites at Kensington's Imagine the Possibilities that she would be taking over the East Coast Division. Excusing myself, I felt like I was suffocating. My shaky fingers were already dialing Ryan's phone as I ran to the garden. I am no longer able to do this. With tears running down my cheeks, I muttered into the phone, "Preston, I can't get married. They want me to be something I'm not." Ryan was quiet for a while. Then he spoke the words that made all the difference. "Then don't be. Olivia, just be who you are." I fell in love with that individual. The following morning, I entered my father's study. My heart is racing, but I'm resolute. "I have something to tell you, Daddy." My voice trembled a little as I spoke. "Preston, I can't get married. Someone else has captured my heart." The subsequent explosion was a nuclear explosion. When I told my father about Ryan and his desire for a different life than the one he had planned, his face flushed crimson with anger. A mechanic. He slammed his fist down on his mahogany desk with a shout. "Kensington bloodline worth $500 million. Additionally, my daughter decides on a grease monkey. He works as an engineer." I shot back, "Daddy, and he's smart. If you've only recently met him, not at all." The sound of my father's voice may have broken glass. "Preston and you will be married as scheduled, or you can disregard everything, even your job and your trust fund. Does that make sense?" I straightened up, using a strength I was unaware I possessed. "Very clear. Dad, farewell." The hardest thing I had ever done was leave that study. My father's threats, my mother's frantic sobs, and the muttering of the domestic help. As I packed a little suitcase and headed off, they all followed. I had only ever known one home. When I explained the situation to Ryan, he was waiting outside his small apartment with a worried expression on his face. He gave a headshake. "That's your entire life, Olivia. You're forfeiting your inheritance and your family. You can't do that for me." I kissed him to hush him. "Ryan, I'm not sacrificing my life. I'm beginning it at last." The months that followed served as a crash education in reality. I took a job as an entry-level business consultant at a small company, learned how to live on a tight budget, and moved into Ryan's little one-bedroom apartment. I felt free for the first time, even if it wasn't easy. My parents used everything from emotional blackmail to direct threats to get me to wake up. In addition to canceling my credit cards and freezing my accounts, they also attempted to get me fired from my new work. But Ryan and I got stronger with each challenge. After deciding to tie the knot, we organized a modest ceremony at a nearby park. No high-end gown, no social media paparazzi, only a few close pals and ourselves. My mother texted me on the morning of the wedding. "I'll be there with your father." One final opportunity to correct this error. As I showed Ryan the message, my heart was pounding. "You make the decision. Love." Squeezing my hand, he said, "Anything you desire." I wanted them there in spite of everything, so my eyes caught them right away as I strolled down the improvised aisle wearing my plain white department shop outfit. My mother wiped at her tears with a monogrammed handkerchief, while my father stood rigidly in the back, as if he had swallowed something nasty. Neither made an effort to attend the event. During the reception, an informal cookout in the park, it was their last play. "Oh, Olivia." Desperation was evident in my mother's voice. "There is yet time. You may yet be taken back by Preston. Consider what you are discarding." As usual, my father got right to the point. "Young lady, this is your final opportunity. You won't get a dime of your inheritance if you stay with this individual. Do you want it that way? To be impoverished?" I looked at Ryan, who looks very comfortable in his rental suit as he chats and laughs with our friends. I then turned to face my parents, who were ensnared in their world of affluence and expectations. I made it plain that I wanted to be happy. "Ryan brings me joy. Perhaps we don't need you or your money in our life if you can't comprehend that." Once more, my father's face took on that perilous purple hue. Before he stormed off, he spat, "You are not my daughter." After a brief pause, my mother rushed after him as they vanished into the darkness. Ryan stepped up beside me and put his arm around my waist. "Are you all right?" I watched my history go away as I leaned against him. Never better. 6 months have passed since then. Together, we adapted to our new existence, working diligently, putting more effort into loving. While attending night school for his master's degree, Ryan kept working at his garage. I gave my everything to my consulting business, gradually expanding my clientele. We were content, really delighted, even if it required cutting coupons and keeping an eye on our expenditures. However, Ryan had withheld something from me that would completely upend my life once more. On what appeared to be a typical Friday night, everything changed. I arrived home early from work. We are eager to surprise Ryan with takeaway from our preferred Thai restaurant. However, our flat was deserted. On the counter was a hurriedly scrawled letter. "At the garage, working late. I adore you." Ryan was used to working late, but something seemed different that evening. Something was odd. Ryan has been working strange hours and taking enigmatic phone calls lately. As my thoughts drifted to gloomy regions, a knot formed in my gut. Did history repeat itself? Was I going to lose it all again? I couldn't stay still, so I went to the garage to get him food. However, it was dark when I arrived. Ryan's beaten vehicle wasn't where it usually was. As I dialed his phone, my hands shook. Directly to voicemail. My phone rang with a text from an unknown number just as worry was beginning to set in. "Carter, Mrs. Kindly visit 1875 Highland Avenue right now. It has to do with your hubby." My heart stopped beating. The industrial district was where Highland Avenue was located. Fingers trembling, miles from Ryan's garage. I entered the address into my GPS and proceeded to drive across the city as it grew darker. My imagination is always generating worst-case scenarios. My GPS directed me to a huge contemporary structure with sleek glass walls. When I got closer, the security gates opened on their own, and a uniformed guard at the door nodded politely. "Go to the top floor in the executive elevator, Mrs. Carter," he added. Executive elevator. Top floor. What was happening? A gorgeous office unit with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the metropolitan skyline was revealed as the elevator door swung open. And there was Ryan, not the Ryan I knew, standing at a glass desk with his back to me. The oil-stained t-shirt and old pants were gone. Rather, he wore a well-fitted suit that was likely more expensive than our rent each month. He turned, and there was a hint of apprehension in his warm, familiar smile. Liv. He spoke quietly, referring to me by his unique moniker. It's probably time for me to tell you everything. Before he could say anything more, my mother, father, and Preston Lockwood seemed as if they were in a scenario from my worst nightmare as the office door flew open. 3. What does this signify? My father's face was already that typical purple color as he thundered. Olivia was on her way up here, according to security. Why are you at the office of the CEO? You. His gaze fell onto Ryan. You're mechanics. After adjusting his tie, Ryan circled the desk. His face was composed. Actually, he responded easily, Mr. Kensington. The so is me. Quiet. For support, my mother grasped the back of a chair. Preston had an ugly, gaping mouth. For the first time in his life, Lee and my father were unable to speak. However, my mom stumbled. You work as a mechanic. Ryan took my hand and grinned. A chain of vehicle repair shops is owned by me. Indeed. It was my first company. Began with a loan from my lecturer in college. However, my primary concentration is Mitchell Innovations. We are a tech business that specializes in batteries for electric vehicles. That was the purpose of those late evenings spent in the garage. We were working on our latest prototype. My mind was racing. How come you didn't tell me? Ryan's eyes grew softer. Because when we met, I had to get to know Olivia. Forbes had recently named me a 30 under 30. My money and position were the only things that fascinated every woman I dated. But you. When I was simply a mechanic, you fell in love. For me, you sacrificed everything. I needed to confirm that my father was whispering anything. At last his business sense was catching up. Mitchell. Innovations, he said, his eyes glimmering. Every big automaker is vying for partnerships with the firm that just transformed electric vehicle battery technology. Is that you? Ryan gave a nod. Last week, our market value reached $122 billion. We're not quite at Kensington Global, but we're making progress. I suppressed a chuckle at my dad's look. Ryan and my miserable husband had been developing an empire right under their noses for all those months that I had been sneering at them. And now? Ryan went on, his tone becoming more acerbic. I want to talk about how you handled your daughter, who just married me and rose to become one of Mitchell Innovations' biggest stockholders. My dad's face became white. For years, Kensington Global has been attempting to enter the electric car industry. Having a relationship with Mitchell Innovations would have changed everything. Look here now. In an attempt to recover control, my father blushed. By damning Olivia's, we were only acting in her best interests. Ryan was still attempting to get her fired, so his voice was still wrapped in silk. I eventually found my voice by forcing her to weep herself to sleep for weeks. That's what you always taught me, Daddy. Second best is never acceptable at Kensington's. No, I didn't. I married the most accomplished, caring, and intelligent man I've ever met. And I didn't know about any of this when I did it. Olivia, my dear, my mom came forward, arms extended. We were mistaken. Now we can see that. Come home, please. I glanced about the amazing workplace before turning to face my amazing husband, Ryan, who had allowed me to go my own way. Help myself. Get more powerful. Mom, I'm home. However, you must accept us on our terms if you wish to be a part of our life. No more deceit. No more authority. My father appeared to be choking on something quite unpleasant. What about Kensington Global? He was able to say. Ryan grinned. We've actually had other proposals for exclusive collaborations from your rivals, sir. But I figured that since we have a familial connection, we would want to look at something else. If you want to talk about it on an equal footing. The hour that followed was unreal. While my mother fretted over my awful flat and urged that we move into a respectable home, my father and Ryan discussed business. Preston had most likely been licking his wounds as he slunk away. I eventually addressed Ryan the question that had been on my mind later that evening when we were back in our tiny apartment. Why continue to labor in the garage? When you have billions, why live this way? Ryan drew me in. I brushed a lock of hair away from my face. I stay anchored in the garage. It brings back memories of my beginnings, as well as this flat. The happiest months of my life have been spent with you. It was ours, without trust, money, or silver spoons. My eyes filled with tears. "You cunning millionaire, I adore you," he chuckled. "I also adore you, my fugitive heiress." After that night, life altered, but not in the manner one might anticipate. We did relocate, but it was to a modest home that we jointly selected. As the CEO of Mitchell Innovations Philanthropic Foundation, I joined the company to use our resources to support young entrepreneurs in pursuing their goals. Ryan continued to educate impoverished kids mechanical skills in his initial shop. My folks are making an effort. Although Mom continues to make overt references to the necessity for trust monies for grandkids, Dad has surprisingly grown to admire Ryan. Their weekly business meetings sometimes devolve into lengthy conversations on anything from philosophy to vintage vehicles. In my case, Ryan's statement that life is too short to live on paper suddenly made sense to me. Sometimes the finest things are hidden under broken-down Ferraris and bad coffee from vending machines. The greatest thing, though, occasionally, when we drive by our former apartment or order takeout from our favorite Thai restaurant, Ryan still gives me the same look he used to give me when I was a rebellious heiress and he was a mechanic. Because love ultimately doesn't give a damn about wealth or corporate empires. When all else is taken away, it cares about who you are. We were just Olivia and Ryan, a fugitive heiress and mechanic who discovered something more valuable than billions. We came across one another,